Hello, listeners. Before we dive into this episode, just want to remind you, Michael David Wilson, friend of the show, he runs This Is Horror. He also have a consultation service for editing and writing. He has worked with people such as Josh Mellerman and David Moody. For more information on that, all you got to do is go to michaeldavidwilson.co.uk/editing. I'm your host, Patrick R. McDonough, joined always by my co-host, Brennan LaFaro.
Except this week, when Brennan has just decided he's too good for me. That's totally fine. Thanks, Brendan.
Unfortunately, Brennan couldn't make it today. He will be back with us probably next episode, if not the one after that. But it'll just be me flying solo today with John Langan. He is the author of The Fisherman, along with quite a few collections. Hello, John. How are you?
I'm fine, Patrick. I'm fine. You're enough for me. Don't worry. Just because Brennan is lying drunk in a gutter somewhere, that's no problem. I don't. He chose booze over me. That's okay. That's all right. You're here. Yeah, you're here.
We're gonna pretend that that's definitely the reason why, and I'm glad someone thinks I'm good enough. Let's dive into the baseline question. What got you into horror?
Oh man, it's funny because I watched your interview with Peter Straub the other week.
Oh.
And so I knew this question was coming, so I've been thinking about this question, like what got me into horror, and I thought, man, I the short answer is when I was a freshman in high school, I read Stephen King's Christine in paperback, right around Halloween it would have been, because that was when the books used to come out, hardcover and paperback for King, and it had this absolutely just like magnetizing effect on me. I was just, before this, I had by and large wanted to be a comic book artist, writer / artist, and much of my reading before this point had been comic books, but I'd been kind of interested in King. There was one girl I went to elementary school with who was a big Stephen King fan, and I was always kind of like, oh, I wonder what's up with Stephen King, And I had I'd read Cujo actually the previous summer, and I was just like, okay, it didn't really do it for me. But then I read Christine, and it was like, bang, this is it. I have got to do this. And I think at the time it was a sort of a combination of things, right? On the one hand, I was not one of the popular kids in high school. So, I read King's portrayal of high school, sort of like almost like intensification of high school, and I even though I looked at it and I was like, wow, the kids who are like obnoxious to me, they're not like homicidal psychos like the kids in King's book, right? And I'm certainly not as good and virtuous as his heroes, but there was like, emotionally, it felt really true. It felt like he was really getting at the way that high school felt. And then there was not just like the supernatural and some kind of oblique, is it there? Is it, did I see a ghost? I mean, this was full on insanity. And for me, I think, who had grown up on comic books, and then also, I mean, I guess the extent that I did read, it was things like Conan, because I read the comic books and then I got the Robert E. Howard books, and so I read Howard and Tolkien and Lloyd Alexander. I always was interested in fantasy, so it was like with Christine, I got those sort of two things together. And I kind of think at the end of the book, even, it's been a while since I've read it, or reread it, I should say, when our heroes are facing Christine, they're in this big like tanker truck, and he talks about it as if he's like a knight and he's like fighting a dragon, so yep. Like in so many ways it just plugged in, and there was something for me, this kind of immediacy about it happening in like the quote unquote the real world, as opposed to a kind of fantasy setting where, I would like read Conan, and I loved Conan, but I was not Conan by any stretch of the imagination. I would imagine I was, but I mean, pick up a sword. Oh my God, it's so heavy, whereas this was happening in the real world. So that was the conversion experience for me. I just, I didn't look back after that. It didn't help that I guess, or hurt that, I should say. It didn't hurt that my high school had no art program. So all throughout, I went to Catholic school, so 1 through 8, and then 9 through 12. So during elementary school, I had this terrific art teacher who was really, really supportive and really, really wonderful, and would put my drawings up on the wall and all this kind of stuff, and really encouraged me to draw. When I got to high school, there was no art program. They had mechanical drawing when you were a senior, and that was it. So there was just no way. I mean, obviously I could have kept drawing on my own, but yeah, King just did to me uh, what a writer like H.P. Lovecraft did to like King and Ramsey Campbell and that generation. Just I've always been fascinated by that. It doesn't always happen. It doesn't happen to every writer, but some writers just encounter that writer who just like activates them, and then I think to myself, I think, I sort of look over my life and I'm like, okay, so what was it, one of my earliest memories is of having eye surgery. When I was 2 and a half, I got a teeny little bit of metal in my cornea.
Ooh.
And in adults, I subsequent many years later, I worked for eye doctors, and so I know that if it happens to you as an adult, it's actually simple. It's in-office surgery. You just come in, you put your head in the little chin rest thing. They're like, don't move. They put a little numbing drop in your eye, and then they just use a little drill and they just drill it out, and it's very quick. But you can't do that with a 2-year-old, so you have to be knocked out. And in my case, I was knocked out. It was an overnight hospital stay. I had an eye patch on. And not only that, but when I woke up, my arms were strapped to boards so I wouldn't tear the eye patch off. And so I have this memory of being in this enormous dark space in this crib, with a high, like a jail cell,
Oh
right?
my God.
And just like crying because they sent my parents home. My younger brother was a newborn at this point, and so my mom was home with him, and so eventually my dad did come back when they were like, oh, he's crying for you. So um, like is that it, you know what I mean, but it seems like even though that was really traumatic, it seems like a lot of weight to put on that, but then when I was in the 8th grade, my dad, who was a lifelong smoker, had these 2 catastrophic heart attacks, one that put him in the hospital, one like a widowmaker basically that put him in the hospital, and then another one after that. And that upended everybody's life. Did that have something to do with it? I was raised, I went to Catholic school. I was raised in a very, very devout Catholic household where the supernatural was very much part of life. And at the end of grade school, I guess like 7th and 8th grade, it was the beginnings of the Satanic Panic. And so we had the church deacons coming in and warning us about what was in Twisted Sister's records and all this kind of stuff, which like in retrospect, when you look at a picture of like Black Sabbath or Twisted Sister, how did we ever how did anybody think these guys were like the devil's servants, right? But Neil Sedaka, that was another story. But I think so there were there was a lot kind of floating in the air that sort of pushed me, I think, in that direction. But it also was just that King's a brilliant writer, and I think that that kind of engaging prose style that he has, it just made me say, man, like it just sort of brought everything together and made me say, man, I want to do this. I when I was in college and in my 20s, I kind of drifted away from. I still read horror, still read King. I kind of drifted away from it. I got really anxious about whether it was respectable enough. Which what can you do? And then when my wife and I got together, she was actually working on her dissertation on Jack Kerouac, and she wasn't doing On the Road. She was doing this lesser known novel called Dr. Sax, which sort of like is his take on the shadow and all this kind of stuff. And she just said to me, Kerouac thought. I talked to her about this stuff, and she was like, Kerouac thought that popular culture could be literature, it could be a vessel for literature, and that was it. That just like opened that sort of reopened, like everything just sort of came together, and it was like bang. It took me a couple years after that. Actually, well, yeah, I guess it probably took a year after that. Funny to think about this in retrospect, sort of doing it, running the numbers, like it probably took me about a year after that to get my first story accepted for publication, and then another year for that to appear. But relatively speaking, that was pretty quick. And so it was, there's a crime writer, a local guy for where I am in upstate New York, named Steve Hamilton, and he said once, I went to see him give a reading at a local bookstore, and he said that something to the effect of, happiness is being able to do something you loved as a child in a way that fulfills you as an adult. And I was like, man, that is like, I have to remember that, because that is exactly true. And I kind of feel in some ways yeah, I'm really lucky, because I feel like that's what I get to do.
I was just taking in that quote for a minute.
Yeah,
That
no, it's a good
is,
one. It's a good one.
I've never heard of that before, but wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
because often we can talk about other things because you covered a lot of ground there, but I just kind of think that the whole cliche of being an adult is not having fun. And as writers, we're forever living, I guess, a children's adventure, if you will, to some degree. Um, Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that I think you're right. Like I think that what I feel like I've what I've learned about fun. But like, because when I was a kid, when I was an angsty teenager, my parents would be like, "What do you want with your life anyway?" And I'd be like, "I just want to be happy." Um, and um, and I think what I what I've come to understand, what I didn't understand at the time, when I was a kid, was that like happiness or fun is a kind of a byproduct of life, of how of the way you're living your life. So that if by writing the stuff I want to write in a way that satisfies me, and so on and such, like that produces happiness, satisfaction, that's fun. So that I think people who might say, I'm just not happy, like why am I not happy? I guess one of the questions might be, okay, like, if happiness is a byproduct, what isn't giving you that byproduct? What is it like? Like, look at your life and think to yourself, what is it about my life that isn't producing that effect? And if I guess I when I think about writing, I'm always kind of surprised by people who are like, I hate writing. Writing isn't fun. Writing is the worst thing ever. Um, I mean, I guess, but I do feel like, man, if it's that bad, don't do it. Like there's no point to suffering that
No.
much, and I think there's a difference between like when you're really wrestling with something and you're really trying hard to get it down, and that can be really tough, sure. But the end effect of that, I feel, should be a certain kind of happiness, or and if that isn't the case, then yeah, I would say, man, then don't do it. Life is really just too short to be miserable, to make yourself miserable in that way. It's okay not to write if you don't want to write,
Yeah.
it's okay not to, I used to know people when I was pursuing the PhD I never completed. I used to know people who were in the program kind of because they could. They didn't necessarily want, like they didn't necessarily love literature. They didn't necessarily love talking about it, but it was kind of like they could do it. So they were like, well, I can do it. I guess I should. And I was like, no, I mean, like it's not as if, I mean, it's not like being a doctor, a physician, where, well, okay, it's tough, but I'm going to make some serious money. Well, I guess, if that's what you want. But I'm sorry, this is a tangent, but this is the key to happiness, people. If
I
only
love it.
Brennan were here, he would have learned this.
I don't think he cares. And he specifically told me something that's like completely, wow, I can't think of, words are hard right now. Contradictory. That's the word. He said, hope he comes back for an episode with me. So I said, well, I know John will for me, but
Yeah, I'm not sure. We're gonna, that the jury is out on that one, man. I'm sorry. He could show up for Peter Straub, but he can't show up for John Langan. I see how it is. That's okay. Yeah.
I don't know what his problem is, man. You're an excellent writer too. Speaking of which, your interview with Straub yourself was pretty damn cool. Like dude, for me, I mean, like I get to talk to great writers that agree to come on, like you, and there's a lot of other amazing talent out there. But Straub's just like he's just so unique because of his longevity, because of his career with his writing with King, and it's weird to me how my generation doesn't seem to adore and love him as much as I think he should be. With other guys too, it applies to like outside of our circles, Lansdale or Ronald Kelly or a bunch of other writers of that time. Maybe even John Skip for people that aren't in the writing circles.
Right, right. Well, I think what part of what's fascinating, almost like historically, if you will, about or from the literary historical standpoint, I guess, about Straub is that he's there at the Big Bang, as it were. I mean,
Yeah,
were there horror? There absolutely have been horror novels all the way back to Frankenstein. Um, but Straub is there when the publishing world starts to recognize, oh hey, we can make a lot of money off this because
right.
of The Omen but particularly The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby and The Other. He's the sort of part of that early wave of writers, along with King, who really starts to do something with that. And I think it's also that in Straub's case, as with King, it's that like Straub starts off and you got like Julia and If You Could See Me Now, and those are good novels, but they're very contained novels. They're
Yeah.
very and then all of a sudden he writes Ghost Story. He just like
Yeah.
and like he just like opens, and then he writes Shadowland, and he keeps and in the same way that King is writing Salem's Lot and The Shining and The Stand, like these guys are just they're almost like inventing the horror novel. They're like, well, suppose you wrote one this way. Well, I don't know, Steve. Suppose I wrote one that way. And so like we're still. I feel like in some ways we're still catching up to them. Like they did. Like Stephen King is like. It's like Eudora Welty said of Faulkner that Faulkner was like the mountain, and she was just like in the shadow of this mountain. And I think that's how we all sort of feel about Stephen King. Like he's like the
Yeah, for
mountain,
sure.
there he is. But because he's such a presence, I think sometimes it's easier to forget or like you just take him for granted, and you don't realize that he's just remained kind of restless as a writer. He's like, oh, I'm going to do a crime thriller now. Okay, Billy Summers, and or I'm going to write revival. I'm going to write this horror novel that is just utterly bleak. That is you want cosmic horror, I'll give you cosmic horror. And so he's just and Straub. I know that Peter's had a lot of health troubles over the years, so I think that slowed him in part. But Straub has been kind of similar in that um, he's every now and again he just kind of like reinvents himself as a writer. Sometimes it's not really is novel by novel, I guess he really does. But he goes through like the supernatural horror phase. It's almost in 3-book increments, I sometimes think. It doesn't quite work out that way, but you had Ghost Story, Shadowland, and Floating Dragon, and those are him really engaging some horror traditions really intensely. And then you've got Coco, Mystery, and
Mm. Love it
Throat.
for that trilogy.
Yeah, and you've got right, and that's like, I mean, it's crime, it's mystery, it's thriller, it's horror, it's gothic. Um, and then he goes in pairs, because then you've got Mr. X and the Hellfire Club, and then you've got Lost Boy, Lost Girl, and In the Night Room. And he's like, well, I mean, like Mr. X, that late in his career, he's like, I think it's time I wrote a Lovecraft novel, and so he writes this insane Lovecraft novel, or Lost Boy, Lost Girl. He's like, yeah, I'm going to write another ghost story, but it's only going to be whatever it is, 200 pages long. I think he described it as like pulling the novel. He had this idea for a novel, and he was like, what if I pulled it inside out? So yeah, it's I don't know, you know, he reminds me, they both remind me of these rock and roll stars who just keep going, Bob Dylan or something. And I know not everybody likes Dylan, but I love him. And I'm like, the guy's 80 years old and he just keeps going. And he just, and every now and again, everybody's like, oh my God, Dylan put out a great new album. He just completely reinvented himself. And that kind of, you know, restlessness, longevity, that's something I really admire and aspire to as well. You know, the Peter's always reading new writers. He's always aware of new writers, and he's been very generous
Yeah.
with me, with Laird Barron. You know, with Gemma Files, with a number of us. He's just. Um, every now and again, you know, people will say, "Oh, who should I be reading?" You know, and he'll mention one or all of us, and that never gets old.
Oh, I bet, man. Wow. Yeah, I asked him specifically a question about blurbs, and at least right now he's not doing them. But to be in to be in that pool, man, where he mentions you
Yeah.
and some of your friends, like I'll speak for you, and if I'm wrong, totally call me out on it. But for me, guys like Straub is like Richard Matheson level or Ray Brad. He is. He's like at that tier. He's like Ray Bradbury or Robert Bloch, which okay, that would be the best example. I think he to people like us is our Robert Bloch. Like he's very friendly, nice person. The stuff he writes is so good. It's next level stuff, and he helps the next generation.
Yeah, he's remained, I think, and part of this, I have to be, you know, I talked to him once about, he was talking about the going to, I think it was a World Fantasy Convention after he and King had written the Talisman, and King was there as well, and he
Hmm.
said he said I couldn't move. He said I'm just surrounded by all these people, and he said, you know, like at first you're kind of like, yeah, rock star life, but then it's a little freaky. And he was like, I was actually kind of relieved when that was kind of over, you know, like, and so I think in fairness to someone like King can't go anywhere because he's just if he goes to a convention or whatever, all he's going to do, I mean, he's going to be mobbed, and I can imagine that could be really, you're just like, yeah, I don't need this anymore. This is not, you know, whereas Peter has, you know, he's had tons of bestsellers, but he's never had that kind of rock star thing that King has, and so he can be accessible in a way that I think King. It's probably the same thing with Neil Gaiman. I would imagine at this point in Neil's life, you know, that he's just not gonna he's not going to go to a lot of conventions, I imagine, because it's really difficult. I imagine it's increasingly difficult for him just to hang out with a friend at the bar,
Yeah.
because there's a line of people who are like, "Can I get a selfie with you?" And you know, "Will you sign me?" So
Can you imagine that? Like, I mean, for I don't know what your dream is, but for me, it's always been to be a stay-at-home dad and a full-time writer. Now, my little guy is two, so I mean, I'm not holding my breath on that happening ever, but definitely not when he's still of that age where I'd be a stay-at-home dad. But I would I would never want that kind of notoriety. Like guys like him, people of that stature, you said it, they can't go anywhere. Like
yeah.
imagine that you're just out with your wife and your boy. Like I saw pictures a week ago, I think it was, where you're dropping off your boy at college.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's nice. That's awesome. I'm sure you guys went out for for a meal and stuff. But imagine you're doing that, and the whole time you got people wanting to be with you, and they probably don't care about like your wife and son, and that would probably even make it more irritating. I would hate that. I wouldn't want to go out.
Yeah, it's I don't know, you know, I yeah, I guess I can't imagine it. You know, I can't imagine that level of fame, I guess, you know, like maybe which is different from success, I guess, because Straub is obviously successful. Robert Bloch was successful, but
Yeah,
I don't think Bloch ever had that problem of getting mobbed in that same kind of way. So I think that the fame thing as opposed to just success and even considerable success, I think the fame thing is weird. And
yeah,
I think It would. It does. When you think, if you think about it too long, you think, man, that'd be difficult to live with. I think, especially in an internet culture and in a kind of, everybody's got a camera with them, and yeah, that it would be very easy for you to feel that you had no privacy and no life. I think.
Another one that comes to mind that is how do I word this? Well, writers usually aren't in front of their own creation with the general public, but King is, gaming probably is. Another one is George R. R. Martin, and he's been writing since, as far as I know, the '70s with
Yep.
the magazine Analog, and he's got some great horror out there too and sci-fi. But you know what the key is that I've noticed, and it's nothing revolutionary, but it's when you get that one or two big movie hits, and to me, HBO TV series is just not just as big, or maybe more so big as the film was back 20, 30 years ago. And once that happens, it's like you can't turn back. Like George R. R. Martin, he, I've seen it, man. Like I follow him on social media. He every single day it seems like has a bunch of assholes asking him about was it book 6 in the
Yeah.
Game of Thrones? It's like you can it's you can't do anything. I mean that alone would be
Yeah.
the worst.
It's
So
it's it's a real it is kind of fascinating because George was, I met him many years ago, and he was already, I think it was, I'm trying to think about this, if the HBO show had just started. He was a guest of honor at Boscone where I was, and
oh
it had led to some of his earlier novels. He has this novel called Armageddon Rag, which is a horror novel about a rock band called the Nazgul, as I recall, and I wanted him to sign a copy of it for my brother-in-law,
nice.
and a nice guy, and all this kind of stuff. But at that point, he could go out in public. He was at conventions, so but it was okay. But yeah, what and at that point there were 3 or 4 of the Song of Ice and Fire novels were out. So he was, and I think, I mean, I don't know his accountant, but my impression is he was pretty successful at that point. But when you go to any kind of film media, whether it's an HBO series, Netflix series, or a movie, your life really does change when it's successful, I guess. I mean, I think there are people who have movies made of their work. The movie doesn't do so well, or whatever. Um, but I think if you have the kind of success he had with Game of Thrones, where everybody's talking about it, everybody is, um, it drives your book sales up. Yeah, your life changes. Money changes everything, as Cyndi Lauper sang.
Absolutely. And now that we're talking about this, it just idea popped in my head. I'm curious if you have any comments on it. Makes me wonder what J.R. Tolkien would have thought about his trilogy, the original, not the Hobbits trilogy, the original trilogy in the early aughts being turned into what it is. Because from what I read, I dove pretty deep into that trilogy the first time I read that. Silmarillion, bunch of the other books that cover stuff outside of the Fellowship, and then of course the Fellowship of the Rings, and they were massive. They were massively successful when they first came out as books. It seems like was it 50 years or so later when the movies came out, they were just as successful, if not more. I,
Yeah.
I would have been real curious to see what his thoughts were on that. To have, like I said, 50 years later, your book is just like it blows up throughout the world. And if it wasn't for that, Game of Thrones, I would put money on it. The Game of Thrones probably wouldn't have been turned into a series.
Yeah, I think that the success of the Jackson movies, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, definitely fueled the Game of Thrones show. I mean, it was so successful, financially and critically and whatever, that yeah, it makes absolute sense to me that they, HBO would be like, okay, how can we what do you got? What's going to happen? And they were looking for, I think, a similar epic kind of story. You know, I would love to see them adapt, say Fritz Leiber's Fafford and the Grey Mouser stories, but most of those don't have that same kind of epic sweep. They're episodic, you know, they're story after story. Whereas Game of Thrones, you know, the fate of the world's at stake, dragons, all this kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I think that they were looking for the feel that Tolkien gives you. I don't know, you know, I mean, he sold the rights, the movie rights, I think towards the end of his life.
Oh, I didn't know
Tolkien,
that.
yeah, I wanted to say in the late 60s. When I was a kid, when I was a kid, it was the Ralph Bakshi Fellowship of the Ring that came out around the same time that Rankin Bass's Hobbit and Return of the King came out. So you had like all of a sudden Tolkien was on screen that way in two very different animated styles.
Right.
And so, yeah, so I struggled through the books and read the Silmarillion, you know, tried to read the Silmarillion when I was like in 6th or 7th grade. And I was like,
Oh my
I don't
God.
know. There's a dragon. That's all I remember. The guy stabs him, you know, that was, there were werewolves. People might be naked at some point. I'm not sure. And, but and he still remains to me this really fascinating figure because he's so, he shapes the way that we think about fantasy, that we think about like sort of secondary world fantasy, you know, um, what was it? There was some kind of meme or something that went around where somebody's, you know, talking to Tolkien and, you know, what do I need to do to create a fantasy world? Do I need to come up with, you know, plot and characters and all this sort of stuff? And he's like, no, you need to invent your own language first.
Yeah.
You know, it's base it on Finnish. So yeah, that he is this really, to me, this really fascinating figure, especially in the 20th century, where there are a lot of great fantasists, but so much before Tolkien, I feel like, you know, someone like Lovecraft is not mainstream, and so many fantasists that we read now, who've been sort of brought into the mainstream in terms of publication and such, they're publishing in these magazines that the fans know, that fandom knows about, but fandom itself doesn't have center stage in the way that it does now. So, you know, Tolkien just, he's aware of a lot of stuff. But you know, he creates this thing that is just like so much its own thing, and he's also in this group with Lewis and Charles Williams and I can't remember who else, and so there's all kinds of things that I think are really, really fascinating about him. And you know, at one point, I mean, he writes in a letter, I think it is, to somebody that like Middle Earth is like so big that there's no way that he can ever write all the stories in Middle Earth, and that he sort of floats the idea that he might actually do something like what Lovecraft did and sort of make it like sort of an open world. You can come in and you can write, you know, and expand stuff. And you know, I don't know why he didn't pursue that. Maybe it was just a passing thought and he had other concerns, but it's an amazingly kind of like generous kind of view, you know,
Yeah.
I never thought about this before, but in a way, you know, in the beginning of the Silmarillion, when he has the creation story and he has, I think it's Iluvatar, the sort of the great god who like is sort of creating things, but then he has like the sort of angels or demigods or whatever you want to call them that he creates, and like he wants them to be part of his creation. So he's like, you know, I want to have trees, you know, but he sort of is like, you design a tree for me, you know, kind of what I want, but you do your own thing with it, you know. And I kind of think that like that's how I think of what maybe Tolkien, and this is a lot of speculation on my part, right, but that's what I think he was thinking about. I've got these ideas, why don't you see what you can come up with, you know, and you do your thing, and so it'll look kind of like what I want, but it'll also be your own thing, and that'll be super cool too. It's why I think, for all his, you know, acknowledged faults, it's kind of remarkable to me, all their faults really, that Lovecraft and Howard and Clark Ashton Smith, you know, like played in each other's sandboxes and encouraged each other to play in each other's sandboxes, and opened it up to people like Bloch and Leiber and so on. It's a remarkable act of creative generosity to do that. Whereas I think Tolkien's, his family, the estate is like, no, 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 that's our IP. You are not touching that. That's unless you're Amazon and you're coming to us with $1 billion, you are not touching our stuff.
Right.
And yeah, and unfortunately, I mean, I get it. We all need money, but it does seem that the drive for profit um, does it constrains things in all kinds of ways. I know that Peter Jackson wanted to make money. I mean, that's not unreasonable, but at least in the original trilogy, I really was not fond of the Hobbit trilogy, but in the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, there is this real feeling of love for for what he's doing. This real feeling that this is, as it were, to invoke a cliche, that the labor of love, and it comes across in the films, and I think it's part of the reason that like people talk about, it's the holidays, we're going to have our Lord of the Rings watch party, we're just going to do the whole, either in one day or over a couple of nights, we're going to do the extended editions, of course, and we're just going to watch all of them because there's I think this real feeling of fellowship in the movie, among all the actors, among all the characters, and we respond to that in a way. There's something really authentic about those films.
I grew up as a kid in love with Star Wars. My dad brought when they did a reissue in theaters. It's like '97, I want to say.
Yeah. Right before Phantom Menace, they tried to remind everybody.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the very first one in theaters I saw was arguably the fan favorite, Empire Strikes Back, and I was just like, this is what I want to do for my life.
Yeah.
But then I saw, and I still love Star Wars, but then I saw in theaters, I think it was 2000 or so, the trailer for Coming This Winter, Fellowship of the Rings, and I mean, that was it, game over, man. And the trilogy for the films to me is very true. It's very respectful to the books. And the one thing I'll never understand, I didn't look up why, but the one complaint I got is, where's Tom Bombadil in the movie?
Oh, right.
He's such a big role in the book, in the Fellowship of the Rings.
Well, I think that I always felt with for Tolkien, how would I put this? Okay, so there's some writers, you read their books and you feel like, and it doesn't matter whether it's fantasy, realism, whatever, but you feel like, man, they live in this world. Like if you were to say to them, hey, suppose you talk about the action that happens on this street. Suppose I go 2 streets over. You don't mention that, but like they would tell you, oh, 2 streets over, well, that's where this guy lives. Like, like they just, and that's how, for me, that's how Middle Earth feels, that Tolkien lived in that place. And so that there's so much but there's a world inside just the trilogy, let alone the Silmarillion. He knows all. So Tom Bombadil is part of that. Tom Bombadil is just this thing, I mean, at one point I went down a rabbit hole of like who or what is Tom Bombadil, and nobody knows. And Tolkien himself was like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
The oldest creature, but that's all we know.
Yeah, is he so? If he's is he God or a god or is he some kind of what is he? Nature, incarnation of nature, all this kind of
like
stuff.
A Greek god to me, man. Like just he's jolly and he knows he could fuck up your day, but he's not gonna.
Yeah, and the ring has no power over him. He's
right.
he's just like sort of outside the system. Like so those two, like the pursuit of power, whatever. He's not bothered by it. Whatever. He's and maybe he's just simply like in harmony with the world or something like that in a way that nobody else is. Maybe it is as simple as that like that's his power is just that he is just that he's achieved because of his long life. He's just achieved a kind of balance or integration with the world around him that most of us don't have because we're alive. Even the elves are subject to certain passions and that throw them out of the world. or into a lack of harmony with the world. But no, not Tom Bombadil. And maybe that's, but he's just another thing. He's just another creature, that's in this giant world. And there were all these things. What happened to the other wizards, and what happened to
Yeah.
Radagast the Brown, and all this
Yeah.
kind of stuff. It's, and I think he. It's funny, because when one of the things I loved about some of King's stuff and Clive Barker's stuff was that they were both very good at like just dropping names and dropping hints of things that were like they just indicated this sort of a similar thing, that there was just this big world out there, this big imaginative universe out there. And I think for King, in part, it was the Dark Tower. Like, I think that was in his mind to a certain extent. And he would, all things serve the beam. And he'd be like, what does that mean? But then there were also things that he would just, Barker with the Cenobites say, the Order of the Gash and all this kind of stuff. It was like, what is
Such a
that?
cool name too.
What does that mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I loved those. I still love books that do that don't wrap everything up in a neat bow, but that are like, well, we're telling our story and our story's happening here and we're moving along here, but in the meantime, we may bump into all kinds of other things from all over the rest of the of a big and strange world.
Imagine that you're not from this world, to play off of that, and we're talking about so let's focus on one pilot in the American Air Force during World War II, and you just follow them. You're not going to get the whole backstory. They're not going to, you're not going to know what happened with World War One if you're just focused on this one character or a band of characters to kind of go along with the whole Battle of the Ring and stuff. Like you're right. The world's bigger, and I love that too because it makes me want to know more. But sometimes, that's life. You're not gonna always know more. I did want to get kind of see what you thought about this, where I read how the Lord of the Rings is responsible for the architecture of trilogies, where Tolkien wanted to do one massive volume, but
Yeah.
I think back then and even today, unless you're of the stature of him where he is now, that's expensive to print a book. What was it, like 1,100 pages? But the publisher wanted to break it up for that reason. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on the trilogy and whatnot, because no matter what the genre is, you hear a trilogy, and it excites me. It's like, all right, there's 3 stories worth of connected to this world. I want to know.
Yeah, no, and I think anytime you can arrange things in a trilogy, so I remember when I was reviewing, I reviewed Paul Tremblay's Cabin at the End of the World, and I said, it forms a kind of thematic trilogy with his previous 2 books, Head Full of Ghosts and Disappearance at Devil's Rock. And he really liked that, and I would not be surprised if his publicist liked that, because trilogy, things go together, and therefore no, it's thematic, they're different characters, but it's really a trilogy,
Right.
and I think that if you read, in the Tolkien books, it's actually 6 books. It's each
oh, you're right.
Each book of the trilogy is 2 books.
Right.
So what's interesting to me is that so it's following, and I've never mapped this out too closely, but it's following the structure of an epic poem. That epic poems tend to be either 12 books or 24 books. And so Tolkien isn't going to write 12 or 24; he's writing 6. So it's a sort of there's an epic kind of plan to it, and so putting it in one volume, I remember right before the Jackson movies came out, they did release a 1-volume edition of the Lord of the Rings. I kind of wish I'd picked it up now, but just and I think they had edited it, like gone through to look for typos and that sort of stuff. But trilogies, it's weird, right? Because it just kind of generates then its own kind of same with films. Most of the Marvel movies now are trilogies. The Iron Man trilogy or It looked like Thor was going to be a trilogy, but the
Yeah.
third one was so different that it's. But I wonder, like I do, I think to myself, so is Taika Waititi going to do a Thor trilogy in essence? Ragnarok, Love and Thunder, and there'll be one more to make that its own little trilogy. People like trilogies. They like. I think part of it is they like the expansive storytelling. I think they like the chance to spend a lot of time in a particular place with particular characters. And it's you break, but if it's broken up into three parts, you can sort of digest it a little bit easier.
Yeah, man, I'm glad I asked that. That's a lot to think about. You know what? I don't have anything to follow up with that besides that's brilliant. I think that's brilliant. And there's one more thing I want to talk about with Lord of the Rings, and we can move on to let's go with your collection.
Sure, sure.
I just think that it's really neat. I didn't notice until the Silmarillion that Sauron's not the toughest bastard in that whole universe. That
Oh no, he's just like he's man, I'm trying to remember. Morgoth is the big bad guy, I
yeah,
think, like the
yeah,
devil, basically. He's like the sort of, I think anyway, he's the sort of Satan figure. And yes, Sauron is just like a lieutenant.
yep.
He's just like a little guy. Um and well, and it's there is something that's really interesting. That so much of the beginning of the Silmarillion is just epic. I mean, it's gods and godlike beings just kind of fighting amongst themselves, and the what is it, the I can never remember the name of the country that's submerged.
There's so many. Yeah, it's the country where it's essentially wow, I can't Atlantis.
it becomes it's a sort of new,
Numenor.
yeah, it's something like that with the N is what I'm thinking, right? God, I'm sorry, Tolkien. But it's so there's just these so it's funny because obviously the events of the Lord of the Rings are epic, right?
Yeah,
But then the Silmarillion describes things that put that to shame.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
oh, there were a whole bunch of people fighting Balrogs, and this one woman kills a Balrog, and I think it's Luthien who kills the Balrog.
Oh, and there's like
And
this mighty Balrog that sounds like it puts the one in the Fellowship to shame.
yeah, and it's just so there were um yeah, it is like it's as if within the world of the Lord of the Rings they have their myths too, or their mythology too, their legendary stories of these crazy things that happened, in the same way that we have these stories of people who did these incredible things in our past.
Right. Okay. I just googled it. I cheated. It is. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correct, but it's Numenor. So I would say Numenor, but
Yeah, no, I would too. Yeah.
in Return of the King, there is a lot of those people. Some of them turn bad, and one of them is the quote unquote the mouth of Sauron.
Oh yeah. He'd forgotten his own name.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's like if you don't read the Silmarillion, I don't think you're gonna pick up on that. But kind of going back to your point about how they'll mention this or that, but not dive into it. That's a good example, I would think.
Yeah, and I also think what winds up, I mean, there are two things that wind up happening, right? And so one is just that, yeah, it suggests this other world, or a wider world, but then there's also the possibility too that you're going to link it up to something, so that in Tolkien, in the case of Tolkien, say, but this applies to Lovecraft, it applies to Laird Barron, it applies to King. Even some of Straub's stuff. Straub hasn't done it quite as much as extensively as King has, but Ramsey Campbell's done it a little bit as well. But you look at you read a number of the different books. You read The Hobbit, you read The Lord of the Rings, you read The Silmarillion, and you're like, oh man, these all connect. There's all kinds of echoes. And it's not just that Frodo is Bilbo's nephew, but that there were other connections beyond that. And obviously in the Silmarillion, then. I mean, the Silmarillion just treats the Lord of the Rings. I can't remember, in like 10 pages or something. So, oh yeah, there was
Yeah,
the Lord of the
yeah.
Rings. By that happened too. Don't worry about that.
I love how Tolkien and Lewis and I don't forget. You said one more, but I forget who else was.
Charles Williams. Yeah, he was the other big. He was the really weird writer of the bunch.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Lewis too. I love the Chronicles of Narnia. I've read. I think it's all 6 books. I got a volume from the 70s. And I just, man, it makes me feel, I love books like that in The Hobbit. It makes me feel like a little kid. And I can appreciate everything in it, but at the same time, I'm just like, nothing's important right now. This is fun. But
Yeah, well, it's I think what it is that the work has integrity. They took the work they were doing seriously. I remember, it's funny, because I remember reading an article that Straub wrote about his first meeting with King, and Straub was living in London with his family, and King's family came over to they were going to stay, thinking about moving to London for a little while. And so anyway, King and Straub meet up. The families meet up, and they're hanging out. And Straub described King. He said there was like this sense of like absolute integrity about the guy and what the guy was doing, and that for whatever reason that really like stuck in my mind. And when when I got to know Laird, that was very much the way that Laird was and continues to be, his absolute integrity about what he's doing. He's utterly serious about it. He may not take himself too seriously, but he takes what he's doing with the utmost seriousness. And I think that no matter what it is like maybe that's something that sets apart the really great writers, is that they just, the sense of absolute integrity, or great artists in general, that they're totally committed to what they're doing, however lunatic it may be. It's what they're doing.
you know what, man, I've noticed that they handle themselves not seriously, but their artwork like that, that's just the switch, and that shit's taken seriously. I don't know if you looked into any other episode, but we had Laird on 7 months ago, and it was the beginning of season 2, and what a kind guy. Like he displays that anytime you listen to him or whatever. But I think we weren't recording at that point. It was after we recorded, actually, and he just asked if we were okay, because it was just during the pandemic, and he said, I just generally want to know if you two are okay. It came out of left field, but it's like, you really don't get that kind of kindness. As friendly as people are online with each other, I don't feel like you get that type of genuine kindness from the majority of people in life.
Yeah, no, Laird feels things very, very intensely. And he is, if he's giving you his time to talk to you, then he wants to engage with you. He wants to, and he wants to know what's going on in your life. So yeah, it's which is kind of weird, because most people are just like, yeah, okay, yeah, great, nice to meet you too, but yeah, no, he's the real deal.
So I'm curious with him, with Paul Tremblay especially. I might be putting words in your and or Paul's mouth, but you guys are pretty much best friends. And then you mentioned Victor Lavelle. I didn't know that you guys are friends too.
Yeah.
So for Victor, how did you meet him? Is it just that you guys are both writers, but doing it for a while? And then kind of same question for Laird, and specifically with Paul, because you two have formed like a brotherhood. I'll just go on a limb and say like a brotherhood you two are.
Yeah, no, all those guys, and Stephen Graham Jones, and to a certain extent Livia Llewellyn, Michael Sisko. We all just, part of it was, in Laird's case, Laird is, I have like sort of the oldest relationship with Laird, and it was that we were published, I was published, we were both published in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction in 2001. I was published in the August issue. He was published in the September issue. And after he was published, the editor at the time, Gordon Van Gelder, sent me an email, and he was like, I just published this story called Shiva, Open Your Eye in the September issue. I don't know if you've read it yet, but You should. I'd be curious to know what you think of it. And it was really weird and trippy, and I was like, wow, this is kind of crazy. But I think so. It opened my eye to Laird. I like paid attention, and I don't know if I communicated with him until the next story, until the I think it was the Imago sequence that was next. And then I sent him this, and I sent him this like very formal, "Dear Mr. Barron, I am, and he wrote back, "Dear Mr. Lang," we were very sort of formal and respectful and this sort of stuff. But and so we just, our correspondence just developed, and it was very, initially it was very genteel and very mannered, and I respected what he was doing so much. It was very different from what I was doing, but I think for both of us there was the sense that we were coming out of this kind of like horror tradition. And although like Laird's kind of constellation of influences included people like Martin Cruz Smith and Cormac McCarthy, and mine included people like Dickens and Henry James. Like, we had enough things in common, Lovecraft and King and that sort of stuff, and Straub, that we kind of recognized, oh yeah, we're kind of on the same page about things. And yeah, we roomed together one ReaderCon, probably like 2005, I think it was. And then we always got along. Which is, we come from completely different backgrounds, but we just were in sync. And it was around 2005, 2006, Paul and I were on a panel together at ReaderCon, and we just kind of got along. And he had a copy of his first collection of stories in hardcover, and I bought it off him. He wouldn't give me a discount, a lousy bastard. And I took his email address, and he took my email address. So then he emailed me, and he was like, "Hey, what'd you think of my stories?" And I was like, "They're terrible." And he was like, "I respect your honesty." But we got along. We just and then he was the one, I think, maybe, I'm trying to remember if he told me about Stephen had published a story called Raphael in Cemetery Dance, which is this utterly insane story.
I've never read that one.
It starts off like a Stephen King story about, like high school kids and blah, blah, blah. And at least I thought it was going to go in this one, like there's this possible supernatural thing, but the way it's going, you kind of think, oh, it's all going to be deflated. And it isn't. It just goes crazy. And I was like, what is this guy doing? And I think Paul reached out to him first, and then we just wound up at a number of different conventions together, and now increasingly, Zoom calls and such. And Victor was through the Shirley Jackson Awards, I guess, because he came. I'm trying to think. I met him because his novel Big Machine, which is a fantastic novel, was nominated, and it won. And so he was there, and we met. We sort of talked a little bit, and then he came the next year to do an introduction for the Jackson Awards, and just over time, we just kind of got to know each other, and it was that thing where you just kind of hang out in restaurants, bars, whatever, and you just sort of chat about your different experiences and such, and I guess, and same thing with Livia. Livia, I actually have known probably as long as Laird, maybe.
Oh, wow.
Or maybe a little bit less, but we met at the KGB readings down in the city. I was like going to see other people, and so she was there, and everybody goes to dinner afterwards, so we sort of hung out and just cracked each other up, and I was like, this person is awesome. And then I read her stories, and I was like, yes. So yeah, and Cisco, same thing. Cisco just was at the KGB readings and was also at ReaderCon a lot. And with Cisco, I wound up, he doesn't drive, so he would take the bus, I think it was, out to ReaderCon, and then I would give him a drive back to the train station in Beacon, not that far from my house. And so we would just chat, and he's Cisco is like a very humble, but he's a genius. And so I would be like, oh yeah, what do you think about Thomas Ligotti? And to just let him like talk about Ligotti or whatever. And I was like, I'm getting an education. And
Nice.
yeah, so like our affection for each other, or maybe that's the thing, we have affection for each other. It's absolutely I absolutely respect their work, the work of all these people. I love it. I look forward to it. I'm excited about it. And that kind of led me then to just be like, man, you guys are awesome. And I think it's cool, to see your friends grow and develop and get better, and to just do these things that kind of spur you to up your game, because you're like, man, I used to say this about Laird especially, but that Laird was one of those people who keeps me honest, that like if I read something Peter Straub does, I'm like, oh, well, that's Peter Straub, and I could sort of let myself off the hook. But I read something Laird does, I'm like, oh, Laird, come on, he's your age, he's younger than you are, come on. So it's helpful to have friends who help you to hold yourself to the standards you want to hold yourself to,
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because I'm just thinking about all these people who's, it's like it's just sort of loose. I don't know. It's not even like a solar system. It's more just like an asteroid belt or something. We all just kind of bang around and bump into each other, because there are people like Glenn Hirschberg, who Glenn's on the West Coast, and so I don't get to see him as much, but I absolutely admire his work and the stuff that he does. He's a terrific writer. The fact that his vampire trilogy like was not really recognized the way it should have been is to me is just heartbreaking. I really hope that Tor kind of gets it together and maybe reissues them in like a single volume or something like that. That would be great, because it's fantastic. It's that's just a great vampire trilogy, and it's just a great trilogy. It's just a great writer.
I've never read it, man.
Yeah,
I've heard of it.
Motherless Child is the first one, and then Good Girls is the second, and I think the last one is called Nothing to Devour. And I would at this point I would recommend taking the chance, and at least, I don't know how much they are all of them are together, say on Kindle or something. I'm thinking you're like, oh, money's tight. I get it. But it's nice to be able to go from one to the other, because each one picks up pretty much right where the one before leaves off. And then it's interesting, it picks up where the one before leaves off, and then there's like a little bit of a gap of time. So I think that's why I say, I think if they were in one omnibus edition, and none of the novels is particularly long, I think that might really help readers to just like sort of immerse themselves in it and just be like, oh, okay, here we go, we're in this world of Hirschberg's vampires. But yeah, people, S.P. Miskowski, another terrific writer. There's so many, and that's just kind of like my rough, approximate generation. That's just like the arbitrary metric of age. Go a little bit further in either direction. There's people like Jeff Ford and Elizabeth Hand, or there's people like Nadia Bulkin. There's just like an abundance, an overabundance, a cornucopia of talent right now.
That word cannot be used in too many natural ways, and you just use cornucopia perfectly. We're not even talking about Thanksgiving, man. So I want to touch on, Brendan and I talked about this before when we were going, because he has questions, and I'm going to ask them at the appropriate time. But
I'm going to refuse to answer Brendan's questions. Yeah, suck it, Brendan. Yeah.
Are you calling him Brendan on purpose?
Maybe.
Oh, okay. Because if so, that's hilarious. If not, that's still funny to me.
I'm going to start calling him Brandon next. I'm just going to sort of mess it. I'm just going to like run through different mispronunciations.
I did that on a few episodes, but I don't know if I said it. I didn't know if I highlighted enough for people to carry on, or if they're just like, that's not funny and didn't acknowledge it. Why did I talk in the first place? Let's see. Oh yeah, because actually I don't remember. Damn it, I'm tripping myself up on Brendan.
He had some questions, but before we got to his questions, you wanted to talk about Thanksgiving and the cornucopia.
No, now I'm getting more lost. But I love. Oh yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Focused on how you have a appreciation for each other and how your friends keep you honest. I brought up Brennan for a reason because he does that with me. I read the first short story read by him was 2 years ago or so, and nothing wrong with it. But I beta read a lot of his stuff in that time, and I read his debut novella that came out a month ago, and I've read a bunch of his other longer stuff, and I'm like, man, you're writing. First, I was writing more than you, and now I feel like the roles are reversed. I got to get my ass into gear, but
Yeah, yeah.
it's. There's no like ill feelings or jealousy or nothing. It's just exciting. It's like, oh, my friend's kicking ass. Well, time for me to step up and do the same.
Yeah.
I want to jump into your collection. Now, I keep saying it's a reissue. Is that fair? Is that the proper
Yeah,
terminology?
yeah, no, it's a reissue. It was published back at the end of 2008. Um, and I had some stories. I wasn't thinking about publishing a collection. I was working on my first novel, House of Windows, and trying to find a publisher for that. And some friends, actually Paul Tremblay and I think Nick Mamatas too, contacted me, and each of them said, "Hey, I know the guy at Prime Books, and they have like a sort of open slot for a collection, and I suggested you." And so I was like, "Thanks, guys." And I contacted Prime, and they were like, "Yeah, yeah, we'll do a book with you." So Elizabeth Hand agreed to write the introduction, and which she's agreed to let us reprint. And the book did okay. You know, it sold reasonably well. I think it got a Stoker nomination. It got lovely reviews, and you know, they did an initial print run of 1,000 copies that sold out. They did a second print run. I think it was 750. Might have been 1,000, but anyway, that came close to selling out. I don't. I think it probably is at this point. And I was like, okay, let's keep going. The thing is selling, you know.
Yeah.
And they were like, no. And I was like, why? You know, why not?
Yeah, that's
And
odd.
they were just like, nah, we're done. We're you know, we got other things to do, you know, and it'll be a collector's item now. And I was like, I'm not interested in producing a collector's item. I want a book that people can read. And so for a while you could find copies that were you know, reasonably affordable, but in the last several years it's just become ridiculous. And it's on the one hand, it's weird, right? It's weird when somebody's like, have you seen this eBay listing? And you see this eBay listing and it's like $800. Come on, that's not right, you know.
That's
And
a
of
dick
course,
move.
I'm right. Of course, I'm thinking to myself, damn, why don't I have any copy? Because I was just given copy when I had a bunch of copies, and people would be like, "Do you have any copies?" And I'm like, "Oh, fine, I'll send you one," you know. And now I was like, "Oh, I could have been making some serious cash out of this." Yeah, my son's going to college. I should have held on to those books. And so anyway, I finally, once I was sure that my agent was sure that we had the rights back from the publisher, I approached Ross Lockhart because Word Horde had done The Fisherman and my most recent collection, Children of the Fang, and I was like, "Are you interested?" And he was like, "Yeah, yeah." So so yeah, we had to do a new cover and new formatting and that. It's he has it Ross has it scheduled for the end of this month to come out. Um, so you know, I was trying to write a new story for it. I don't think that's going to work at this point if it comes out in the end of September. And maybe that's, you know, I kind of go back and forth on it, like, because part of me thinks if someone has the book already, like I shouldn't do like a gimmick to make them buy a new version of it, you know,
Yeah.
like that's like, you know, like a band would put out their greatest hits album and it would have like one new song on it, and you'd be like, well, I got to buy the album for the new song, you know. And maybe speaking of dick moves, maybe that's kind of a dick move, you know.
You're better than that, Mr.
Right,
Langan.
maybe I should not, you know. But I have actually started a story. I just have not had the time to finish it. So I don't know what I'll do with that. Maybe Ross will put it up on the Word Horde website or something like that. Make it a freebie or something. I don't know, but
How many words is it?
I don't know. It's probably not going to be that long. It's probably only going to be like 5,000 words. I say that, and it'll probably be like 25,000 words, you know. But
Here,
I have.
here's the thing for potential readers that haven't read your stuff that I don't think you're going to say. Your short stories aren't ever average length for most writer short stories.
Yeah, some guy, it was Rick Kleffel, I think, who used to do this program called the Agony Report, I think it was, and he interviewed me for it. And when he put up the recording of the interview, he called it something like a book full of novels or something like that, which was very flattering, because I thought, yeah, that's in a way that's true, that I approach a lot of times writing short stories like they're really novelettes or novellas, and I approach them like as little novels. It's only really in my last collection, in Children of the Fang, like which is to say, like within the last like 5 to 10 years, really 5 years, I would say, that I've started to sort of figure out how to write a shorter story. For a long time, I was desperate to write short stories, because I would see all these calls for submissions, and I'd be like, oh man, if only I could write, like if I wasn't writing a 45,000 word story, like I could submit to all of these, and I couldn't. I just couldn't manage it, and I still find it a challenge. Everything I write just wants to grow and grow and grow.
Mm.
But and there's life that gets in the way and all that sort of stuff as well. You have a 2-year-old, you know about this.
Yeah, I love him so much, but some days I would just like to write in the morning. That's my. I can't complain because he's the greatest gift in this world, and I'll never get this time back. So hopefully, if I'm alive down the road, I can write in the morning when I'm older. But for me, ideally, I don't know if you have a preference for writing time, but if I could write every morning from like 7 to 10, I'd be super happy. Try the Joe Lansdale approach where it's like write 3 hours a day and you're done instead of 12 hours a day or whatever, like some writers. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, 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 not at all. I was going to say, yeah, I used to write really well in the morning. Now I would say I write better at night. Um, but yeah, having that time is a really good thing. I think the other thing I would say is that um, when when my son was born, when my wife was pregnant with my son, she's a now a tenured professor at
Mm.
the local college, and so the plan was, oh, she'll go in and teach, and I'll stay home with the baby and write. And I had this like little picture of myself, like here I am at the computer typing away, like rocking my son, like he's like in his cradle, and I'm rocking him with one foot or something, and that was not what happened. So let's just put it that
Right.
way. And there was and that was which was entirely normal. And I see lots, and I felt really panicked, because at that point I had I had 3 stories published. It was a story a year, and I was doing okay. I was getting some notice, and I'd had a couple of award nominations and stuff. And suddenly I couldn't do anything, because he had colic, baby acid reflux. He
Mm.
he didn't sleep through the night for any longer than 3 or 4 hours. So my wife and I were just like the walking wounded. We were just
Right.
like, and I felt really kind of panicky, like, oh my God, I'm going to lose all of this. The sleep deprivation didn't help.
I'm
And
sure.
obviously here I am, and I survived. Eventually he started sleeping through the night. It eventually he got to the point where he was like, I don't really need to spend any time with you. So I feel like whenever I see parents with new or young children saying, oh my God, it's so overwhelming, and what am I going to do about my writing? Like I just want to say, don't worry about your writing. Your writing will still be there.
Yeah.
Just sleep. You need to sleep. You need to take care of yourself. You need to sleep when you can sleep. You need to take care of the baby. The baby is going to grow. It doesn't seem like it, because sometimes it feels like the hours just drag by, but the baby is going to grow super quick. And before you know it, that baby is going to be in kindergarten or preschool or whatever. And if nothing else, the baby is going to go to sleep, and you're going to have like an hour where you can write. So just like hang in there. Don't beat yourself up about it. It will get better. It does get better. Um, and most writers, the thing I guess to keep in mind, I feel like in America in particular, we're addicted to this idea of like youthful success, and we look at like F. Scott Fitzgerald, and he writes This Side of Paradise when he's 21, and all this kind of
Right.
stuff. And but most writers, they don't start. I think it was, I think it was John Scalzi who said this, that most writers write their first novel in their 40s or their 50s. So that's something to keep in mind, you know. And here's the thing, like someone like Toni Morrison publishes her first novel when she's 40, she still wins the Pulitzer Prize and the Nobel Prize for literature. So
Kind of a big deal.
right. So you're like, no, but that's too late. I'll miss out on everything. No, you not necessarily. Don't worry about it. You know. So and Penelope Fitzgerald publishes her first novel in her 60s, and she wins the Booker Prize and lives to her 80s, and you know, publishes about, I don't know, 10 or 12 novels or something. Like so there's always like I know that we what's the story about the enjoy yourself, it's later than you think, that's on the tombstone, you know. And like I know that we often feel that way. Oh, it's later than I think, you know. And I get it, we don't know how much time we have, but I think that the worrying that you do about that doesn't help you. So it's better just hang in there. If you have a family, especially a young family, devote your time to them. Hey, if you can squeeze in some writing, that's awesome. If you can squeeze in 15 minutes, even an hour, great. Absolutely do that. If the baby goes for a nap and you can jot down 15 minutes, then do that. Like don't. And I think even Lansdale says that Lansdale says, you know, if you can find like 10 or 15, it doesn't have to be 3 hours. You can find 10 or 15 minutes, jot down a couple of paragraph or something, and just slowly chip away at whatever you want to do that. That's if in that way you can tell yourself, I'm still doing it, still doing a little bit at a time. It's something that I think, I feel like a lot of creative writing classes and a lot of kind of the way we portray writers and we think about writers, none of them have families, or they're like, it's like,
yeah, right.
it's like the guy is the writer, but his wife just takes care of everything for him, you know. And
Shit ain't gonna work.
yeah, that's not that, you know. Look, the realities of publishing have changed so much that it's very difficult to make a living. It's always been difficult to make a living as a writer, but the mid-list, those writers who sell but aren't blockbusters, that has disappeared. It's really been taken up by the small presses. And so and the small presses do fantastic work, and in some cases I would say they're doing the Lord's work, so God bless them. But but they don't, you know, the money is not their like lots of money is not really their thing. So so it's just not possible to do it in the way that you could maybe in the 60s, when the cost of living was cheaper too.
Right. You know what? And I'll throw one more name there that I heard about through Neil Gaiman. I forget what he was talking about, because I love listening to people talk. This is why I got the show. I love picking brains, and I can ask questions now. But Neil Gaiman was on, it's either a panel or just a Q&A. He threw out a name that I never heard of before. This is going back a few years. R.A. Lafferty. He's
Yeah.
But I don't know how many people actually know about him. He's an American sci-fi and fantasy writer, and he's got quite the bibliography. He passed away almost 20 years ago, but he didn't start. He was in the military. He was a electrician, I want to say. He didn't get his first story, not book, his first story published until he was 45. And I think he really took off, if I remember correctly, when he was retired. And I'll bring him up again, Ron Kelly. He was writing for Zebra, and as far as I know, that was like the biggest mass paper market publisher back then. And he stopped writing for 10 years, and he picked it up in 2006. And for some reason, and I know this because of how much I talked to him, things didn't really start picking up for him until about a year ago. And this guy has quite the bibliography himself, and it just goes to show you different people have different paths. But I want to comment something, a few things you talked about, if that's all right. And
Sure.
I feel like you kind of like know my life the way that you just described some things. But I think it's a thing of us writers, how we feel about how we have to get this done now. Um, it wasn't until after we talked to Peter Straub, after I had read, um, was it the Rose trilogy, and then we talked and we amplified my love for. Because when you read a piece of writing and you love it, and then you read, talk to the creator, and you're like, they're such a nice person. For me, anyways, it makes me love their work more. I don't know if that's how you're wired, but for some reason that's how my brain is, and it just made me think. I don't have. I got 4 short stories published. I've written over 10 novels, and at this point in my time, since 2013, a million words. So there's a lot of writing, very few published, and I'm not knocking people that self-publish or anything, but I'm glad I didn't choose that route. I did try that once in 2014. I pulled it, but because I'm embarrassed of it. That's my earliest stuff. But my whole point to bring this up is I'm now at the point as a full-time worker, as a father of a young guy, a little guy. I'm not rushing now. I just want to have fun writing. I want to try to get some novels out, and I haven't felt this way since I started writing, seriously writing in 2013. Because I would spend like 6 hours some days in writing. I feel exhausted, and now I know what I want. I want to get my first debut novel out there when it's ready, and prep it until then, and just have it, in my opinion, blow open some doors that I didn't think were gonna be blown for my debut. Meaning, I want to be proud of it forever. And it's really freeing when you, for me anyways, when you hit that point where you're not constantly pressuring yourself with, I got to get this word count done today and then tomorrow. So I hope I didn't blabber on too much, but
No, not at all. Not at
just to
all.
piggyback off of stuff you said, how I can personally relate to that. And again, this is new for me. This isn't, we just had Peter on a month ago, I think it was, but something about talking to that guy, man, and just for me, I think I said in the episode, Coco. You brought up Christine with being that book that did for you. For me, it's Coco. There's
Hmm.
something about that book, and I'm floored by it, and I'm like, that's my goal. That's what I want
Yeah.
to write, and I'm not gonna to get to that. Like, I'm not saying I'm gonna write something of his stature. I mean, I'm like you. He's up here, and I'm like, whoa, can't even see
Right.
me on the
Right.
screen.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm like, that's what I want to shoot for, and you don't do that by doing anything but giving it your all. So it kind of like humbled or not humbled. It pulled my anxiety down with that too. So that's my long-winded way of saying it's very freeing to not be like that. And for me, it took 8 or 9 years to reach that point, but it feels amazing. I'm not a pain in the ass with my wife anymore. Like, I got to get this writing done. And Lansdale said one more thing, and then I'll hand it over to you. He said one thing to me about write a sentence a day, because I reached out to him when the last month I've just been struggling with writing, but I've been okay with it because I kind of know what I want to do now with my own writing, and I just reached out to him. I'm like, I'm not sure like what's going on and whatnot. He goes, write one sentence a day. He goes, seriously, just write one sentence a day at first. And I've done that, and it feels good. I get it out of my system, and I'm like, I never heard that advice before. So the other thing he said too was, families first. Families first forever. So that's all I got to say on that. Your turn, sir.
No. It's Joe's absolutely right. It it um, the 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 one of the pictures we have of the artist, I think, and again, I think of this as coming out of the kind of 20th century, especially, is of the artist as, like, selfish inherently. The art, and whether it's writing or painting or acting or whatever, sort of the person who's a genius, but in order to be a genius, they've got to be like horrible to everybody around them, and
Right.
selfish, and so on, and I kind of reject that. I I I just think to myself that if my art has to come at the cost of like everyone I know and love, then maybe that's not such a good thing. And I'm sure there are some writers out there who were like, you're a wimp, but, don't have to worry about him then. He's not willing to sacrifice his family. But I just don't think that those two things, I feel like my family ultimately has made me a better writer because they've given me a better life and a fuller life. If I wanted to be a real jerk about it, I would be like, they've given me lots of stuff to draw on, but it's that they make me happier. They give me a life that is meaningful, beyond writing, beyond, just and so I'm not saying it's for everybody. I'm not saying everybody has to have a family, but I am just saying if you do have a family, your family doesn't necessarily like I think some writers think of it as like it's like a millstone around their neck, oh, they're such a drag on me. No, they're not. They do ask things of you, yeah, that's true, but you ask things of them too. And keep in mind that family is a dynamic situation, and that a young family is very different from, I mean, now my wife and I look at each other and we're like, what do we do? Our kid's off at college, and we're just like, it's so, I mean, we dress the dogs up in little costumes and act out plays, but that only goes on for so long. And then you're like, all right, we need to write the next installment, So I think that, and I think that what Joe said, in whatever situation you're in, you do what you can do. So if it's just one sentence, then you do that. You do the one sentence. And as more time becomes available to you, maybe you can increase that, to 2 sentences or 3 or a page, who knows? But I think that there's, I do think this is an effect of social media. I really do. I think that writers probably always have felt this way. I'm missing out. I got Hemingway has a new book out. I got to get one out. But I think that
Right.
in these days, where man, there's just a new, like everybody has a new book out, and I think even if you're just trying to read, if you want to stay current with the field,
It's impossible.
yeah, I think there's oh, you got to read this, you got to, and I think that's something, maybe that's the advantage of having like my sort of friend group is I do feel I want to stay current with what they're doing. And as long as I can do that, I'll try to read other stuff too. Sure, absolutely. But if I like, at least if I'm staying current with what they're doing, I feel like, okay, I'm keeping up with something.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely fair. So let's get back to, and we didn't name it, for those that haven't read it yet, for potential readers, your reissue of your very first collection is called Mr. Gaunt and Other Uneasy Encounters. Um, I really enjoyed it all around. It's just like it's a solid collection, man. And I don't know how you're gonna take that. I only mean it as
No,
a
no, thank you. I appreciate it.
compliment.
It's early work, like now at the time I was like, here I am, but and I'm still proud of it. I still love the stories in it, but um yeah, I'm not the same writer I was when I wrote them.
Titular story, Mr. Gaunt, though, that was my absolute favorite. That and was it Tutor? Is that
Tutorial, that one.
tutorial? That's it. Because it took. I mean, like I love stories about writing, but only if it's kind of like I don't want to hear the same old retelling of a writer who's just a drunk or whatever. But what you did with tutorial was so damn cool. So that's gonna lead me to Brendan's first question about this. So you don't have to answer Brendan LaFergro's question. I don't know how to say his last name anymore. It was, can you talk about your experiences with the overwhelming writing rules of academia? Do you really hate Strunk and White?
Yeah. Actually, where that came from, Brandon, is I so the first summer, well, okay, so I'm just trying to think of the sort of chain of events. Okay, so my first story, the first story in that collection actually is, well, on Skua Island, my first professionally published story. Um, I sent that out, and then I was trying to write a second story, and then that story got accepted for on School Island, got accepted for publication. I was like, oh my god! So I kind of like wrote an early version of Mr. Gaunt, and I sent it to a magazine, and they rejected it. And when they rejected it, they were like, you need to read Strunk and White. And I was really pissed off, and I was like, who do they think they are? And my wife was like, you should write like a book, or you should write a story where Strunk and White is like the evil book, like it's like the Necronomicon.
That's so
And
funny.
I was like, that's what I'm gonna do. So in some ways the story, like there are some ways in which which tutorial, like I'm like, oh man, this is a little ham. There are things about it I really love, like that there were kind of weird effects, and the tutors, the individual tutors, I really like. I really like how weird they are, but I feel in some ways it's a little like it's like my artistic cry from the heart, and I sometimes feel like, oh, maybe I kind of laid it on a little too thick there, but then I get one person that there's a if you've read the story, then you know that there's a scene where the editor has this knife that he plunges into this manuscript. And I had this woman write to me, and she was like, where can I get one of those knives? And I was like, that is really freaky. That's not the person you're supposed to identify with. He's the bad guy, But yeah, it was a, kind of youthful, this is what I want to do. These are the things I want to do. These are the writers I admire. Um, so I would say that, like, ironically for me, it wasn't so much academia. I would say, so like there I was responding specifically to a magazine. I kind of, I did place it in an academic setting, in part that there was, how do I put this delicately? When I was an undergraduate, I thought about being a creative writing major, for obvious reasons. And I talked to a few people. There were only a couple of people a couple of teachers in the creative writing program, and there were I knew a couple of people who'd taken classes with them. And there was one, in fact, I remember there was one girl who was a big Clive Barker fan, and we sort of, bonded over that. And she was like, yeah, she was like, every time, like, I give this guy one of my fantasy stories, I get like a D. And I just get told, no, this is not what you should be doing. This is garbage.
Oh
And
man.
I remember one week she said, I went to the Albany bus terminal this weekend. I had this crazy, but like, and I just wrote that. I just wrote like, this is like I just wrote like basically like almost like a journalistic account of what I did. And he still was like, this is unbelievable. This would never happen,
That
So
dick.
yeah, he was. I mean, his thing, I mean, to exaggerate, but only to exaggerate a little bit, apparently, was if you wrote about, like, your first sexual experience and how disappointing it was, um, and so I was kind of discouraged by that, because I felt that uh, I wanted to do crazy things, whether I don't know, even, not necessarily even horror, but just weird stuff, Flannery O'Connor stuff. And to know that I couldn't do that because this guy was like, no, you're going to write, in this particular way. I think that did intersect with the Strunk and White stuff. So I take it back. There is some academic kind of stuff in there as well. It was weird though, because I had a lovely professor, um, as an undergrad, and when I did my master's degree, who, she was the best, and she said some of the best and some of the worst things to me. She told me not to write horror fiction because horror fiction was not literature, which I still remember. On the other hand, she told me I was going to be a good writer because I was a reader, because I was an English major. I wasn't a creative writing major. And she was like, you're reading, and that's really, really important. So that helped me because there were times I was like, oh man, but I'm not a creative writing major. But to be told, hey, it's cool, you're doing the reading, you're doing the background work, I guess you would say, that was helpful. So
Yeah, absolutely. Sigmund Freud would probably have a lot to say about that first teacher. uh,
oh, he was terrible. Yeah, that's yeah. Anyway, yeah.
Sounds like a was it a dumpster fire teacher.
Well, he just, the guy he was, he did this thing where he had a novel come out, and a friend of mine was in his class, and it was an American literature class, and he said, "Oh, the first day of class, we're going over the syllabus," and he said, "Well, our class is supposed to go up to the contemporary day, and I just had a novel come out. Well, why don't we read that?" And I just was
Oh
like,
my
dude,
God.
So every now and again, like when I've taught college, when I've taught high school, and my students find out that I write, I've had them say, "Hey, can we read your stuff?" And I'm like, absolutely not. Like, you can read it on your own, but I'm not going to make you guys buy my stuff and read my stuff. That's not cool. It's because either you might tell me you don't like it, and then I'm going to be pissed off, or or you might tell me, "Oh, I love it," but you're just kissing up. So
Yeah, and in that position, you are in a position of power, at least temporarily with them. And
yeah,
I mean, I would feel the same way. I wouldn't know if they were kissing my ass or not for a better grade.
yeah.
So
It's just not a
that's
good
just
position.
uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's not a good position for anybody to be in.
Right. Brendan, no, actually, was it not Brendan? Brampton? I don't know. Brennan?
Bramden,
Uh,
I like Bramden. That's good.
Brendan Stoker asks about the story. I'm gonna mess it up.
Lau Cohen, yeah.
Lao Kuan, or the Singularity. What are your thoughts on superheroes and comics as modern day mythology compared to the Norse and Greek classics? Damn, that's a good question. That's a
Yeah,
really good question.
I mean, I think there's more truth to it even than seems to be the case. I love mythology, and I've always loved the Greeks and the Vikings, and I'm always
Mm,
fascinated to learn about new mythologies. But one of the things you learn if you do even just a little bit of digging about the like say the Greeks is that their stories and their characters changed over time. And so they it's not to say that they discarded old stories, but they were like, well, there was other things that happened too, and then in the case of the Greeks, what's kind of complicates matters further is then the Romans are like, oh, you mean our gods, and they take all the Greek gods and then they change them even more, right? So that and that's very much like it's not difficult to see a kind of analogy to what happens or has happened with superhero comics. When Spider-Man, who was one of my favorites when I was a kid, when Spider-Man shows up, he is I'm trying to think if the Fantastic Four came. I think the Fantastic Four came first and then Spider-Man, but like he's one of the original Marvel heroes. In fact, one of the first things he tries to do is get a job with the Fantastic Four because he's like, I need money.
Oh, wait, I think that's the first one.
Yeah, it might be the actual first proper Spider-Man where he goes to
Yeah.
so like what's happened to Spider-Man now, where he's like Iron Man's protege and all that kind of stuff. I get why they're doing it, but there is a little part of me that's like, no, Spider-Man is there before Iron Man.
Right.
Spider-Man is doing his own thing. He doesn't need mentoring by Iron Man or by anybody. He's he is your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. He's doing, and he doesn't need a suit that's like all sort of high tech and that. He makes his own web shooters and his own web fluid, but like and his own little camera, but like and I'm not saying that there have been interesting stories that have taken Peter Parker sort of further into his own future, as he gets older. But so anyway, yeah, I think that comics are absolutely a form of mythology for us, and like mythology, mythology changes over time. Characters, the Greek and the Roman philosophers, for example, were really scandalized by Zeus/Jupiter because of, in his earliest versions, he's just having sex with everything. He's just everyone, I guess. He's just, but as everything, he's like, now I'm a swan, now I'm a bull, now I'm a rain of gold,
Like
and
he's George R. R. Martin just saying, like, let's fuck everything, kill everything.
yeah, he's yeah, George. Yeah, anyway, and he and so like the philosophers were kind of scandalized, and they would be like, no, Zeus is like, he's the greatest god, and he's full of compassion, and it starts to sound very much like the sort of the Judeo-Christian god, that well, if we have this great powerful god, he has to be this compassionate figure and so on. So anyway, things change over time. For when I was a kid, for a long time, not a kid even, I'm just thinking like in the 90s, into the early 2000s, probably, Iron Man just like, he kind of ran his course as a character. And at one point they, geez, what was it? Like Tony Stark's younger self came forward in time to be Iron Man. And at another point in time, he became a bad guy. Until Robert Downey Jr. sort of reinvigorated that character just with the force of his own personality. And then suddenly we were like, oh my God, Iron Man, he's great. But he was probably a safe character for Marvel to try their first movie with,
Right.
because he was at that point, sort of like a second tier character. And now, of course, he's one of the major Marvel characters. They'll have him back before too long, I'm sure.
Yeah, plus, you know what? At the time, too, when did that come out? Did that come out in like 2001, 2, whatever it was?
It was 2008.
Was it?
Was
Holy
Iron
shit.
Man? Yeah. It was pretty. It was pretty. It was 2008. Yeah.
Yeah, so bring that up because it was still a hot button issue with like the Middle Eastern War, and it still is today. But
Yeah.
that was a fresher point. That was a closer time to 9/11 than today. So I'm sure that helped a little bit too, because at least as an American, I'm like, oh yeah, he's killing these assholes that try hurting everyone, even their own kind.
Yeah, it was definitely an updated version of the figure. I mean, Iron Man's always been involved in the kind of military industrial complex, right from the get-go. It was just originally he was, I want to say originally it was Vietnam, or sort of thinly disguised Vietnam, that he's injured in, and that he develops the armor and so on. And just over time, it just there was an interesting reboot of Iron Man in the late 90s, after the whole Onslaught thing, where they tried to tie his origin to the Hulk's origin, but they were both injured in the bomb, and he gets the metal through his heart, and Bruce Banner becomes the Hulk. But that was just like trivia. Yeah,
I never watched that. Sounds like it could be funny or really bad, but I was curious. I think it was that one that Brennan just mentioned, Lacoon or the Singularity. That was with the Vikings, right? The dig and whatnot.
no, that's the first one on Skua Island. That's the
Oh
Vikings.
shit!
Yeah,
Okay,
Laocoon is the one with the statue.
right. That's the last one.
Yeah, the big one. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, that was a longish one, but I bring up Skew Island because it reminded me of this movie that came out last year called, well, actually this year, sorry, it's still 2021, The Dig. Did you see that? It came out on Netflix.
I haven't. It's about the Sutton Hoo discovery, yeah, with Ray Fiennes, and yeah, no, I haven't seen that one yet. But all that stuff was one of the things that my wife and I kicked around at a certain point. We were talking about like mummy stories and all this kind of stuff, and I think she was the one who was like, oh, bog mummies, and that would be a different way to approach that. And I was like, oh yeah, and ultimately that led to the story.
That's such a good movie. My wife and I watched it when it came out on Netflix. He had one more question, and it is about Skew Island. How did you go about developing the story with a story Langan-esque style we see in The Fisherman on Skew Island and Mr. Gaunt?
Yeah, that seems to be my thing. It's sort of funny. It was like Simon Stranzis, I think, once posted a picture. And there's a photo of a guy holding a frame, and inside the frame there's another frame, and inside that frame there's another frame, and so on. And he was like, "Here's a graphic of a typical John Langan story." And I was like, "You're not funny, Simon." Of course, everybody was like, "That's hysterical," But in part, Onsko Island came about because I was writing. I was taking a class. I was taking a graduate class, and it was, the focus of the class was on contemporary kind of like reworkings or revisitings of specifically Victorian era material. And one of the things we could do for our final paper was we could write our own story. And I was like, score. So I thought, well, a very Victorian thing is the club story, is people sitting at later Victorian, but anyway, is people sitting around just telling stories. And I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'll have a bunch of people that are sitting around, and that's how we'll tell we'll get the story. And that became that became a kind of thing I wound up doing and returning to over and over again, and in The Fisherman in particular. And I'm not sure why I find it so congenial. Part of me thinks that it's because a lot of the stuff that I read and I loved when I was a kid, Faulkner's stuff, is has all sorts of like sort of dramatic monologues, I guess you would say, in it. I read a lot of and a lot of stories within it. So a lot of Joseph Conrad's, like Heart of Darkness and Lord Jim, have the character of Marlowe telling stories. Robert Louis Stevenson's Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. There's stories within that. Right. Even Frankenstein, the monster tells his story. So yeah. And I'm sure there are other. I know there are other examples. I'm just not thinking of at the moment. But I really love that form, and so there's that I have been exposed to it. But also my both my mom and my dad were well, my mom still is really good storytellers. They grew up in Britain after the Second World War. There wasn't a lot in the way of entertainment, TVs or whatever. It was mostly radio. You might go to the dance hall, but you also had to be able to tell stories, to sort of entertain yourself and entertain others. And when I was a kid, my brother and I had a pretty strict bedtime, 9 o'clock. But there might be a movie on, like a James Bond movie. So we could watch like the first half hour of it, which was almost all commercials, and then we had to go to sleep. I was like, oh, come on. But then my dad would like narrate the entire movie to us the next day. And then James Bond says, and then, and of course he would cut out all the sexy stuff, Right. So I think that's part of it too, is that it's part of, it goes back to my own sort of childhood and family experience.
That's great. Yeah, so for me, my favorite, like I said, was Mr. Gaunt, and I just like what you did with the character itself. I don't know how else to phrase it without spoilers, so I'll just say, like, the revelations in that story with Mr. Gaunt was just it. You could make it really corny, but you didn't, and I was to picture it. I'm like, this is so creepy. If I saw that, I'd shit my pants.
Yeah, no, that the monster in that story was suggested to me by my older son, who's now just turned 31, but at the time he was, I don't know, God, 7 or 8, and actually I'm trying. It's interesting how old. No, he's probably a little older than that. He was probably around 10 or 11. Anyway, and he had written a story about this particular monster, and he was like, I think you should write a story about this. And I was like, okay. And it worked out, but it was funny because he suggested that. And then another friend of mine, a former teacher, said, no, that monster, you couldn't do anything with that. It's not scary. It's just a bad idea. So then there were like, on the one hand, there was the impetus of my son saying, you should do this. And then there was also the kind of like, you can't do this or that, which made me think, no, I'm going to do it now.
Challenge.
Challenge accepted,
if you told me that, what your monster would be beforehand, I'd be interested to see how you play it out, but right away, my asshole mind would say, it's probably going to be pretty corny. Because you see it in some movies, and I'm not going to name examples again. Don't want to spoil it, but you pulled it off, man. And it's just it's for me. It was the different layers of focal points, like your details with man, this is hard not to we try not to spoil books, so I'll keep it very vague. I don't like doing that, but it's the vague it's the details that you pepper in there where it's pointing out like this is another part of the monster, this is another aspect of what they aren't doing, and those two components are supposed to be together, but they're not. um it's all creepy and it's perfect, and you have this really great way of building up tension. And if you're okay with it, I'd like to jump to the fisherman, unless you want to
Sure. No,
actually.
that's, I appreciate that. I thank you. I appreciate the kind words. It's still one of my favorite stories. And
It's a lot of fun.
I come back to, I have come back to, the, one of the characters in it, actually two of the characters in it, in more recent stuff. So, it's sort of, you know, there were things, uh, and I have a novella that also deals with them. So, and anyway, that's, well, eventually I'll finish that.
And when did you say it's coming out?
That, well, Ross has it listed for the end of the month, the end of September.
Okay.
So, yeah, I presume that's what we're doing. You know, I'm focused right now on the next book, which is another collection of stories, called Corpse Mouth and Other Autobiographies, and we're trying to get that out around Thanksgiving. So I just finished writing the new story for that, and I'm typing that up and typing up the story notes. So that's been my focus, really, is getting that book done, and getting the last bits of that book done, and so we can get it to the printer and so on. So I think Ross is just going to go ahead with Mr. Gaunt, so that that's out there.
Man, you got the coolest damn titles for collections like Sephira and Other Betrayals. And the picture for Sephira, it reminds me of uh, Odysseus's tale, where he's seeing this. It's not Cyclops in your cover, but
No, it
it,
has that
it
sort of feel of this big monster that would eat you.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and,
No,
and
I've been very lucky both, when my first novel was published, House of Windows, the guys at Nightshade Press, they had this sort of like, this is before they were bought up by Skyhorse. They had this kind of like, and not even a stable, that's not the right word for it. They just kept track of artists. They just had and so there was this, Santiago Caruso, Argentinian, artist, and they were like, we want this guy to do the cover for your novel. And so I was like, great. And then when I did, my second, so Wide Carnivorous Sky, and then Saphira, I said to Derek Hussey, you know, at Hippocampus Press, can we use this guy? And he was like, yeah, sure. And Santiago was like, absolutely. And, so then with the more recent stuff, Children of the Fang and now Corpse Mouth, I wanted a different look for those, because I wanted them, because, the Fisherman had come out through Word Horde, and these are also coming out through Word Horde. I wanted them to have a more similar cover design. So we went with Matthew Jaffe, who, he actually did the cover to Laird's, second collection, Occultation. So he's redesigned. He's done a new cover for Mr. Gaunt, and he's working on a new cover for Corpse Mouth as well.
yeah, I haven't seen the new cover for Mr. Gaunt. I'm really
Yeah,
interested.
it's still under wraps. I've seen it though. So, and actually, the funny thing is what we've been trying not to give away, it completely gives away.
Oh no.
But in a really cool way, in a really nifty way.
Okay. Just to list off, and you know what? I'll tell you, I haven't read this collection or Saphira, and I want to. There's just so many damn books that you gotta read.
Oh no, I hear you. I hear you.
We try again. We try limiting it to like 6 guests a month, but I'm the producer of the show, and I tend to be a bad one in the sense where I get like 8 or 9 because I want to talk to everybody.
Sure, yeah.
But Children of the Fang, it's not the full title. It's Children of the Fang and Other Genealogies. That's so cool, man. It's just like it makes sense. It makes complete sense because even if the stories aren't tied together in a collection, in a way, if we're breaking it down to say like the animal kingdom, you're gonna have this class of species mixed with that one, and it's gonna be one package, if you will. So Other Genealogies to me makes sense. Now I could be completely off base with that, but I love your titles because they kind of they don't. I don't know how to word this. They don't feel like collection titles in the sense where it's not just like a collection or what have you. Is that something you set your goal your sights on to always have a unique take on a title for each collection?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with the first collection, I thought Mr. Gaunt was the right title for the collection, but I felt like it was not enough.
Hmm.
And so I was like, but I was also like, I got to be careful because suppose I call it like Mr. Gaunt and other, terrifying encounters. People are going to be like, that didn't scare me. So I thought, don't set yourself up. Say uneasy, and uneasy that'll cover it. Like because then people can just be like, yeah, it was uneasy, or they can be like, to say the least, it was uneasy. So that kind of set the pattern, and in some cases. Like Sapphira and Other Betrayals, I had written this cluster of stories that were just really about betrayal. And I was like, man, these all have to go together. And that was the title. And whereas Children of the Fang, I knew Children of the Fang was the title, but I wasn't sure what the rest of it was going to be. And many of the stories, I'd say about like 2/3 of the stories probably were written for like tribute anthologies to different writers. And I was like, oh, okay. And then even the ones that weren't explicitly written for tribute anthologies, it was like, here's a story where like there's a story in that where I was thinking about Peter Straub, and I was like, I want to write like a little Peter Straub story. So I was like, okay, so this is kind of like a family tree that you're sketching out. This is all your kind of literary, or some of your literary genealogy. It's not everybody, but it's some people. So I thought, oh, and Children of the Fang, okay, that works. So. But yeah, I do think about that a little bit about the subtitle or the full title is like this way to kind of like suggest to the reader this is kind of what's holding all of these stories together.
I think that's a great idea. Is that a lady or a guy in the cover?
It's a lady.
Okay.
It's I don't know who she is exactly, but well, maybe I do. I don't. But yeah, no, I had a lot of fun. I couldn't really work with Caruso when he did the covers for Sapphira and the Wide Carnivorous Sky and that, because he's in Argentina. It was difficult to communicate with him by phone. But Matthew Jaffe's in the US, he's in California, so we can chat, sort of hop on the phone and talk about what am I thinking about the collection, what's he thinking about it. And then like it's the coolest thing, that you get this email that has all these attachments, and it's like it's his ideas for what he's going to do. And that's kind of mind-blowing. As someone who wanted to be a comic book artist, it's really cool to see someone else doing art, inspired by your work.
Yeah, I bet. And maybe I got my decade wrong, but this kind of feels like it would have, specifically Children of the Fang feels like it's pulpy, maybe 40s, 50s.
Yeah, no, it definitely has a kind of, a somewhat pulpy feel to it. It's different. Caruso's stuff is like the cover of Sapphira is, you could say it's pulpy, but there's also kind of a feeling of like, what's his name? Francesco Goya or something like that. There's a kind of sort of classical feel there. Jaffe's stuff has some of that, but there's also a kind of pulp feel to it as well.
And I know that over the years, the word pulp has changed. I know that it used to be kind of not thought of as super great, but for me, I love that stuff.
Sure.
To me, pulp. I mean, like the two reptiles in the back. It's like sci-fi and horror meet, and it
Yeah,
creates
no, so much of my early reading, it's funny, like even before I discovered King, um, it wasn't Lovecraft I was reading, it was Robert E. Howard. And
Oh, okay. How old were
and
you?
I was, oh man, that was how I got through like fifth grade math class. I was probably sixth grade math class, was hiding Conan behind the math book.
Yep.
Um, and so, the Conan stories, and then he had a collection of stories, or someone put together a collection of his stories. It was called Wolf's Head and Other Stories. And there were a bunch of stories in that made a powerful impression on me. So yeah, the kind of pulp, Howard had much more of an impact on me than Love. I read Lovecraft when I was much older, and I liked him, and I still like him, and I kind of respect him, and all this kind of stuff. But Howard got me like when I was really young, I think, and so there were ways that there were probably traces of his work stamped all over my work if I wanted to look for them, if I wanted to. I've sometimes thought about that, rereading some of his stuff and then like seeing if it jogs any. Oh yeah, that's where I got this from, or that's where I got that from. You know.
That's great. Yeah, when I read Lovecraft, and I've said this in a few episodes, but I think it's worth repeating. Uh, that in high school I felt too dumb to read, and basically what it all comes down to is my ADHD unaddressed until now, my early 30s. But I didn't know that at the time, so I'm a late bloomer with all this reading. But
Mm-hmm.
it's great to run a podcast like this because I get to read and then talk to guys like you. But
Sure, sure.
Lovecraft, I read him in my let's see, probably early 20s, and I just had to. I personally love the guy as a writer, as a person. I know what he's got in the past, and I mean, I still think that without him, you can't have what we have today without him. So he's. I'm a firm believer in knowing who came before you. Um, at least have an idea about that stuff. But
Yeah.
I
No, I
need it.
think that it helps you to it. You were mentioning Coco before, right? You will
Yeah,
be a better writer because you read Coco.
yeah.
Imagine if Peter Straub could have read Coco. Do you know what I mean? Like how much
Oh,
better,
my mind
how
just
much,
blew up.
right? So imagine that Peter had read Coco. Like what more could he have done, right? So that's the thing, right? You know, is that like the stuff that came before you? Yeah, that it allows you to to take the next step. It allows you to do the next thing.
It's kind of like a parent. It says, "Hey, look, this is what I learned at your age or before, and this is what the end result was. Now it's your turn." But I was gonna say with Lovecraft, I need a dictionary because I'm like, man, I feel like an idiot. I don't know most of these words that he's putting in these stories.
Right.
Uh, I want to talk briefly about the fisherman because we are hitting the 2 hour mark, and we this is usually the longer episodes, and I just want to cover the fisherman
Sure,
before we
sure.
wrap up. For me, I know you already, I think you read the review that I wrote, but it's just I loved it. It's an instant classic, and I gotta know at the very least, if I were to ask one question, it would be how much prep did you do before writing this? Because it seems very well thought out.
Oh, well, it took me 12 years. Uh,
Okay.
and it starts actually it starts with my wife pregnant with our younger son. And I actually have to back up before that even. I apologize to anyone who's heard this story before. Um, when I published my first story on School Island, I wanted to publish another story, right? But I was also afraid, like I didn't feel like I had a lot of ideas at that point, and I was afraid, like, oh my God, I'm going to use up all my ideas. So I thought, okay, if I can write like basically and publish a story a year, like I think I can manage that. And so by the time just before Anskua Island came out, but before it was published, I had written Mr. Gaunt, and I had sent that out, and I'd had that accepted. And then just before Mr. Gaunt came out, I wrote Tutorial and had that accepted. So I was on this kind of trend, and then my wife found out she was pregnant, and I was like, oh man, I got to get the fourth story written because there's a baby coming, and I don't know when I'm going to be able to get that fourth story done. So I started to write The Fisherman, or what would become The Fisherman, thinking it would be just a story. And it grew and it grew and it grew. And I got to the man, I'm trying to think. I probably yeah, I probably got to the end of the first part, and I was like, man, this is a novel. But I was like, don't say novel, you know? And so I put it aside because I wanted to write this other story. And then that story became my first novel, so obviously I was just at the point where I needed to write a novel. So I wrote House of Windows, and then I wrote some more of The Fisherman. And then over the years, I kind of came back to it. For a long time, I was stalled out. Um, about halfway through it, probably, where there's a scene where our intrepidity in the past, where this sort of group of men goes to confront the fisherman, goes to confront this sorceress character, and I was just stuck. I didn't know what happened, and I thought, well, I'll do something kind of oblique and cryptic, but I was like, that's not right either, And then Jeff Ford gave, at this point, Laird was writing the Croning, and Jeff gave him some advice. Jeff was like, look, this is your first novel, and your impulse is going to be to play it safe because it's your first novel. He was like, fight that impulse,
Right.
Don't be afraid to go nuts. And so although the Fisherman wasn't my first novel, I still was like, you know what, I got to take Jeff's advice. And so I just went nuts with it. But it took me from like on and off. It wasn't like every single minute I was writing, but it took me about 12 years all told. And it's still, we were rejected by every publisher, all the mainstream publishers that my agent sent the book to.
That's
they were
insane.
like, no. They were like, it's the literary ones were like, there's too much genre stuff. And the genre ones were like, it's too literary. And there was one editor who was like, I don't like fishing, so I'm not going to accept this. And,
Oh my God.
We had one editor who actually was really close, who actually did want to do it, and his higher ups were like, no, we're not interested. So I mean, for what that's worth to anybody, like, it's tough when you get rejected, right? Like, you sometimes you think, is it, like, I thought I wrote a good book, is that, sometimes books just don't, like, it takes a while for them to find their spot. The same thing with stories, like sometimes sometimes what you need to do is rather than like rewriting, like, you got it to a point where you sent it out, and unless somebody can give you really specific feedback and say, look, you need to fix X, Y, or Z, and you're like, oh yeah, that's a problem. But let's say you've written it, you've got it to where it needs to be, you send it out, and it's maybe, it's making the rounds. Rather than like worrying about it and rewriting it every time you get it back, move on to the next thing. And then move on to the thing after that, like keep, rather than obsessing over the one book that you're going to, or story that you're going to write and rewrite over and over again, and which may never find a home, like sometimes that happens too, that you just have to kind of let it go.
Yeah, like I told you, man, I wrote 10 novels, and I mean, for me, the first few years were specifically, these are practices, and I'm not saying trunk stories. It could be great if I go back. I don't know, but my whole point was, you gotta practice, and it's very rare where me and Keith Lansdale were talking about this, actually. So this will be coming out the week after his episode, but we said it's basically very rare for you to write that first novel, and it's To Kill a Mockingbird. Like, that's
right.
That's right. So rare.
And that would be really difficult,
right.
like to write like when I wrote on Skua Island and I published it, it got really nice reviews. It got nominated for the International Horror Guild Award, just the story, and it didn't win. And I was a little disappointed, but I was also, in retrospect, kind of grateful, because I was like, man, that would have felt like, well, what do I do now? Like, I got a story published in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. I got good reviews. I won an award. Do I need to do, like, I'm done. It would be really hard to, to get past that. And so sometimes I actually had a student many years ago. He was an older guy, returning student, and he had done a business career and all this kind of stuff. And he talked about how he got this business award, and it was like this sort of as good as you could get in his particular profession. But he said that the guy who gave it to him leaned in and said, okay, what's next?
Right.
And he said at the time, he was like, come on, let me just enjoy this. But he said it was kind of a saving thing that the guy said to him, because rather than just focusing on, here's it, like being paralyzed by that moment and that success, he was like the guy was telling him, there's more, this is not the end, and so so sometimes success can be a tricky thing too.
Glad that you kept at it. You know what, just to and I'm not kissing your ass when I say this, but there's only one book, and I'll tell you, I'll make it number 5. But if I had to pick 5, and I was writing this while you were just talking, if I had to pick top 5 horror novels ever that I've read, I'm going with Richard Matheson's I Am Legend, Ray Bradbury's, and fair to say that this might not be horror, but I don't give a shit. Uh, I love books, so seeing them burned is horror for me. Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, Arnold Kelly's Fair, your book, The Fisherman, and Thomas Harris's, and this is the one where I might substitute one of his other books, Red Dragon or The Silence of the Lambs. So I'm just
Well,
making
thank
a
you.
yeah, I'm just making a point. In my opinion, it's very much so top shelf quality, and it for all the reasons that I wrote about in my review, which was basically to summarize it, it's it feels like a telling of a classic. I said classic, contemporary classic, and that's an oxymoron, but just meaning that you wrote it in the modern time, but it feels like something you were taught in school. And it always made me smile when I saw a little reference to Herman Melville, and I'm like, this guy definitely likes Moby Dick at the very
Oh yeah,
least.
absolutely. It started off. I mean, one of the other things I did with my early stories was I thought about them as like responding to stuff I had read, like to classic works of literature I had read. And so yeah, with this one, I was like, okay, Moby Dick, which is a book I really love, although I totally get why people are like, I hate this book, I don't want to know this much about whales. And
Yeah.
so yeah, so it definitely was in, and it, is in dialogue in to a certain extent with Moby Dick, but it's more like, it's not like, like when King does Salem's Lot, he does a kind of one-to-one between what's happening in Dracula and what's happening in Salem's Lot. What I wanted to do was take Moby Dick and sort of like take the jigsaw puzzle and sort of shake it apart, and then just sort of see what falls out. And so the correspondence is not always in that same linear way that King does say. It's just that there are echoes sort of cutting back and forth between the two books.
Right. And another really cool thing that I love in it is it totally it I think let's see. I'm just thinking of the writers I've read this year in the books, and it's all mixed new and old and classics, but you're one of the closest, if not the closest writer to Straub that I've read, meaning specifically that it's definitely literature. But there's also, when you write horror in it, it's just like, oh my God, this is either unnerving with your tadpoles. That scene, man, it's so creepy. It's, a good example would be in Stephen King's It, in the when they're adults, the kids are adults, the loser clubs in the Chinese restaurant, and I think it was Richie that looked at the what is it, those cookies? So can't
Oh
think.
yeah, yeah,
Fortune,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
fortune
yeah.
cookie. And it's an
Everything is, yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah, it's like an eyeball or whatever. Like it's so simple, but yet oh, it's so
yeah,
unnerving. And
yeah,
then you
yeah.
have moments of pure brutality, and it's not like over the line in the sense where it's unnecessary. All of it makes sense, but that's why I love that book, and I hope some people that haven't read it yet, listening to this, buys it and reads it too.
Well, thank you, thank you.
Absolutely. Is there anything for your two books that you want to cover before we start wrapping up?
No, no, that's we've said that we've done a great job. I appreciate it. I'm happy that Mr. Gaunt's coming out. I feel, um, Lau Cohen, especially the novella in it, like, um, it was at the time. It's funny. It has something in common with my first novel with House of Windows, and that they're both kind of about unlikable characters.
Mm,
And I've sort of thought to myself, that they probably, from a sort of strategic standpoint, were not great things to publish as a new writer, because people want like sympathetic characters if they don't know you as a writer, because they don't
right.
trust, like what is this,
Who are
and
you, Mr.
so.
Langan?
Right. Whereas it like now I could write a story with an unsympathetic character, and people will give me the benefit of the doubt. They'll be like, oh, okay, let's see what he does. Whereas at the time, Lau Cohen is about this guy who's a sculptor, and he's kind of like he just is a failure in a lot of ways. And I was bouncing that in the same way the fisherman bounces off Moby Dick. this was bouncing off of a very short novel by Saul Bellow called Seize the Day, which is about a guy who's also a kind of a loser. And that was, I was like, let's do that. But people, people don't want to read about losers, and I was really, I still am really proud of what it did. But I think people were just like, I don't know. And so I'm kind of hopeful that now people will be like, oh, all right, well, let me take a look at this. Let me see what the guy was doing. So
I think they
yeah,
will.
I'm happy to have the book back in print.
Yeah, and really grateful, and I'll speak for Brennan here. Really grateful that you allowed us to have arc on that. So thank you for that.
No, you're
Um,
welcome. You're welcome.
for the fisherman, there's one thing that sticks in my mind when Brennan and I were talking about it. We talk like every day about, literally almost every single day about books, especially with the upcoming guests. And for the fisherman, because we both read that with Mr. Gaunt pretty much back to back. And when we were talking about the fisherman, one thing that Brian thought that was just absolutely what's the word? Not mesmerizing. It was pure horror. Was something so subtle yet not really, which was, and if this is too spoilery, let me know and I'll cut it. When he returns to fishing and he won't go in the he'll only go in the shallow end, and I'll keep it at that. But he's like, there's something about that. He's like that's just pure terrifying. And I gotta agree that was brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, well, it was just I figured, we all have our compulsions. We all have our things that we feel like, oh, I need to get back to that. But how do you do that after you've had these horrifying experiences?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
it's like, well, maybe I'll stay in the kiddie pool or the kiddie end of the pool. How did we all go back to the beach after we watched Jaws?
Oh, I still get my wife busts my chops all the time, and the Cape Cod is like a second hometown for us. And
Hmm.
I'm like, the areas of the Cape we go to, they're on Shark Week. That's why I'm scared of great
Right,
whites.
right,
It's
right.
Jaws. It's absolutely Jaws. But I before we go with the wrap up questions, I want to ask one thing. Do you know if you'll be at Merrimack Book Fest this year?
I am planning on it.
Yes.
It just is really going to depend on the sort of COVID situation,
Right.
how things develop. So, um, please, if you haven't gotten your vaccine, please get it for yourself, get it for your, if not for yourself, get it for your family, get it, and mask up and, yeah, be safe because it would be lovely. It'd be great to see everybody again. We did it virtually last year. It would be great to be able to do it in person this year. So let's all try to make that happen.
Absolutely. Um, let's jump into the first one, which is what are you reading currently?
I'm reading a bunch of stuff right now. A bunch of different arcs. I have an arc of Josh Mallerman's forthcoming book, Ghoul in the Cape, which is like this big, gigantic kind of 80s style horror novel where, yeah, there were two characters on this cross country mission and they're trying to prevent the end of everything. And it's really wild, and it's really, in some ways, I think it might actually be the best written thing that Josh has done.
Wow,
And
that's saying something.
yeah, it's really lyrical and really, he's taken his time. There's no rush or whatever. He's really just kind of letting the world like fill out. So yeah, that one I'm trying to get done as soon as I can, so I can maybe send a blurb into Earthling Press. And uh, I'm reading an old novel by V.S. Naipaul called A House for Mr. Biswas, which is the kind of realist novel that Naipaul wrote about his dad growing up in Trinidad in the early part of the 20th century. And he's a great prose writer, and I try to stay in touch with um, great prose writers. And geez, I teach high school, so there's stuff I'm looking at for that. But and I've started Stephen Graham Jones's My Heart is a Chainsaw, So that I may try to just push through that this weekend and just get that one done.
Well, man, that sounds incredible. You know what? Brennan and I were lucky enough to talk to Paul, and we're waiting on that Mallory book too. I cannot wait. Like I'm a slow reader, especially compared to him. I don't know how he reads so damn quickly. It's
Mhm.
like before about a year ago, it'd be like, all right, at least I got the writing on top. Like I can write faster than Brennan. Don't got that anymore either.
You know, it's Brian cheats. I've decided he's Brian now. He cheats. He reads the Cliff's Notes versions. He just kind of skims. He's just like, scary stuff happens. And because you're good and decent, you take him at his word. But he's lying. He's lying like a rug, like
You
a
know what?
cheap rug.
I'll say it on here. How about you? Fuck him. He's fired. I'm
He's
punishment.
like,
And
no.
ah, John Langan is now the official co-host of Dead Headspace,
Oh, there you go.
whether he wants to or not. What? Who said that? I am currently reading. Well, I just finished. Let me pull it up. I want to pull up my cheat sheet, which is my Goodreads, my Goodreads app. I just finished, and I don't want to mispronounce her name. Katriana's Last House on Needless Street.
Oh
And
yeah. I'm looking forward to that one. Yeah, I don't have it yet, but I'm really looking forward to it.
I talked to her tomorrow, but for chronologically, when her episode releases, it'll be a week after yours.
Yeah.
Me and Brennan talked about that. He can't make it for that either, but because
What come on, Brian. What are you doing? Come on.
yeah, it's just this weekend some stuff came up, but he said, "Good luck trying to not spoil that book when you talk, and if you read it, you'll get it." It's like we talked about Mr. Gaunt and the monster.
Yeah.
It's just I'm gonna have to think on it.
Yeah.
What the heck do I say about this and that? Because it's really, I mean, it's certainly worth that Stephen King blurb. It. I can say it's a crime, and it does something that I've seen prior, and it's really, I mean, that's not an insult. Like what's new? Not much, but it's just so well written. It's so well executed, and it has all these twists and turns, and even if you see some of them coming, it's one of those things where it's so fun of a ride, and it's quite frankly the subject matter is a little fucked up, but I mean that's why we read horror
Yeah.
for some reasons. Another book that I'm going to be diving into soon is Don Winslow's City on
Hmm.
Fire.
Yeah.
Man, talk about top notch crime writers. Don is fantastic. Really can't add anything else to that. And then there's one more that I'm going to dive into in a couple days. Someone who we're going to be talking with, I believe it's next week, Eric LaRocca. He has a collection that just came out as was it 2 days ago from this recording day? I think it was 1 or 2 days ago. It's his first collection. It's called and talk about a guy that comes up with awesome titles. He comes
Yeah.
up really neat ones. The Strange Thing We Become and Other Dark Tales. That is out through Off Limits Press, a publisher who puts out a lot of great books. But you know what? I'm so happy to be alive at this point in time.
Yeah. No, there's good stuff. There's a lot of good stuff being done.
And speaking of Merrimack, going back to that, I mean, there's so many people that write incredible stories. You can't keep up with them. Like Hollywood would not, if they started to actually invest the time, I think they should in the independent market or just books in general that aren't Stephen King or like Anne Rice. They wouldn't keep up either. It's impossible because when we try to get all the people that we think are newer or whatever, there's like 12 more the next minute.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing. Listeners, if you want to check out our website where we have a shop, it is deadheadspace.com. All you got to do is go to the shop tab, check it out. If you're into that, if not, well, then ignore this. Where can people follow you, Mr. Langan?
I spend way too much time on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. I do have a blog. If you look up Mr. Gaunt, the website for John Langan, you'll find it there. Yeah, instead of doing all the writing I should be doing, I suppose I'm just like, oh, let me post another picture of my little dog. So,
well, I mean, that all sounds lovely.
yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts, sir?
No, thank you for I'm so grateful to, always grateful and still kind of stunned in a way. It's sort of funny, like you think to yourself, we're talking about Stephen King and what it must be like to be at that level of fame and so on. And I guess I'm not, because, I still like to talk to people. I'm still amazed that people want to talk to me. I'm just like, seriously, it's funny because there are a few other John Langans out there. There's another John Langan who writes composition textbooks. And I always think, are you sure you don't mean that John Langan? Because, composition textbooks sound like a lot of fun. So yeah, so I'm thank you for the chance to just kind of babble on and talk about the Lord of the Rings and stuff, hang in there, everybody. It's still a tough time. Maybe it's always a tough time, but it feels like it's still a really tough time right now. So just hang in there. We're do the best you can. Take care of yourself and read good books.
Yeah, that's great advice. And you know what? That's funny because when I see people say that they're bored, adults in particular, I'm just thinking, get into reading, man. If that's You can read anything. It doesn't matter what it is. My final thoughts is we're really glad that we could have you on. And even if Brendan was here for this one, seriously, we want you back. It would be fun because I talked to Paul about having him on for season 3, so he's going to be doing that. Victor, we're in the very early stages of talking with him about maybe this year or next year, but we'll have him on. And Laird, we'd want him back. But I would love to have you guys, just a group of whoever, you and Paul and whomever else, just come on and talk. So maybe we can do that for next year. Be fun. Next episode, everybody, is episode 114 with Catriona Ward. We're going to be talking about that book I mentioned, Last House on Needless Street. I'm not sure what else we're going to be talking about. I haven't recorded it yet. So stay tuned for that. And as always, you have many choices in podcasts. Thank you for listening to us for the last 2.5 hours, and have a good one.